Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Justin Warner. I will be hosting this webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today I'm joined by Dave Long and Christian Nielson, two consultants here at DecisionWise. And our topic today that we're going to be discussing is around employee engagement and the concept that we can build employee engagement. And part of that building employee engagement is working under the premise that engagement is a learned competency, something that we can, as leaders, both learn to become engaged and how we can help our teams engage others as well. So we're really excited to have you here with us. Dave, Christian, thanks for joining us as well.
A pleasure.
So we have a lot to discuss today, and we'll just kind of move on from the formalities. But Dave, why don't I go ahead and turn this over to you to get us started? And why let's maybe just start with the question, why is this such an important issue where we move engagement to the managers and what can they do to really begin to learn to become engaged?
And we'll talk about that a lot as we kind of get into this presentation, but the main thing that we kind of look at is the engagement efforts in many organizations will be centered around a core team, a committee, the HR department, and that's really where all the engagement efforts are centered. They try to enlist leadership in the process of improving it, but sometimes it feels like we're a little bit squeezing the balloon. We squeeze one part of the balloon, the air goes to the other part of the balloon, and it feels like no real progress is made over time.
Yeah, great.
Some of the things we want to talk about today as we get into this into this idea of engagement as a competency. First thing we kind of want to talk about is why might this be important to you? There are different levels of engagement that you might want to achieve as an organization, depending on what sort of organization that you might be. So how critical is engagement to your organization? Do you have a high level of client interaction? Do you have a high-touch production process? Is the cost of a turnover event very extreme for you? Is it high cost of replacement for the people that you have? Do you have a need for innovation in your organization, or is your organization growing rapidly? Now, there are other reasons why you might want people to be engaged in your organization. And I would argue that there's sort of a responsibility of employers to create a tenable environment for their employees to work. So there are many reasons why you might want to be engaged, but we found that organizations that experience this sort of thing, where they have employees heavily involved with their customers, or if it's expensive or turnover is high in your organization, those are areas where you might say, we really want to adopt a higher level of engagement beyond just the survey itself. So just to kind of take a step back and say, how do we view engagement? Employee engagement is an emotional state where we feel passionate, energetic, and committed to our work. In turn, we fully invest our best selves, our hearts, spirits, hands, and minds in the work that we do. Engagement is the next level beyond just being satisfied in your work. Satisfaction is something that we delineate between satisfaction and engagement when we're talking about engagement. Satisfaction, if we'd done a survey or done this process 20 years ago, we might have called it an employee satisfaction survey. Today, we call these employee engagement surveys, and there's a difference between just being satisfied and being engaged. We want to lead people to actually be engaged and not just satisfied. So we put a toothbrush in the background of the satisfaction slide. Why do we do that? It's kind of like satisfaction factors we consider to be hygiene factors. So if you think about when you're brushing your teeth, if you brush your teeth in the morning, you don't really think about it for the rest of the day. If you don't brush your teeth, you're kind of covering up your mouth, or you're kind of doing the thing where you try to brush your teeth with your tongue throughout the day, and you kind of think about it a lot. The point is, a hygiene factor at work is the same way. If you do have appropriate pay and benefits for the work that you're doing, if you do have the tools and resources or appropriate work conditions, or you feel safe at work, or psychological security at work, if you have those things in place, they're things that you don't really think about. But when they're not in place, they become the most important part about your job. They're incredibly distracting. They can lead you to be very dissatisfied. So it's very hard for somebody to engage over the long term if they're not satisfied in the short term.
I think that's a great point, and this is Christian speaking. Dave, I love the way you describe these hygiene factors. They don't have the power to engage, but they have the power to distract. And at best, they're going to satisfy our employees. I love that perks is on there. I like that that's on there because we see a lot of organizations think, oh, well, we can buy employee engagement. We can buy it with a foosball table or a ping pong table or something like that. Nothing against those things. In fact, I'm a big fan of all of those things. But I also want to keep it in context that they can drive satisfaction. They can't drive engagement. You can invest in the right activities in the right areas to drive that engagement. I think that's where we're headed next.
So when we're looking at engagement, we're looking at specific things that actually cause engagement. In our research, we found that there are things, attitudes that people can adopt, or attributes that organizations can have that can actually lead to engagement. This slide is, I think, a little bit hard to see. So let's see it in larger slides. There's going to be 5 factors: meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection, into an acronym that we call MAGIC, or a model that we call the MAGIC model. And these factors are the things that lead people to be engaged. It's beyond satisfaction. We're actually leading to engagement here. And this is really important as we start to think about how do we create engagement through our managers. We want our managers to understand what are the things that actually lead people to be engaged, so that when they're thinking, I've got to engage my team, they're not just thinking, I need to have bigger bonuses this year.
Dave or Christian, could one of you talk about how important it is to have a framework or a singular message, a language, if you will, that you can talk about engagement? Why that's important to be able to discuss this with managers before we go down that road?
Yeah, it's critical, Justin, because if we don't have that in place, what we see is an organization just without focus. We don't know where to focus on. We might just say, okay, well, these are the lowest scoring items. Let's work on those, and in a survey or something like that. Versus, let's have an actual meaningful conversation around the areas that are going to yield the best impacts. I like to think of yield the best results in engagement, or actually improve the employee experience, drive higher engagement. I like to think of engagement as essentially an invitation. An organization can't control whether or not I engage in it, but they can do a lot to create an environment to invite me to engage. And so the framework helps us understand what a compelling invitation to engage looks like. And this MAGIC acronym is all about that. One, at the organizational level, and where we're headed in this conversation, at that manager level. We give them a language and a framework, a model, to help them understand the tools that are going to actually improve that experience on their team.
So otherwise, we're just guessing as to what is causing engagement in our organization, or even on our survey. If we don't have a framework to look toward, we're just making guesses, and maybe they're educated guesses, but we're making guesses as to what is actually causing engagement. So these 5 factors: meaning, your work has purpose beyond the job itself; autonomy, you feel trusted, you feel like you have the power to shape your work environment in ways that allow you to perform at your best; growth, you feel like you're being challenged and stretched in ways that result in personal and professional progress; impact, you've seen worthwhile contribution to the organization, to the goals of the organization. You have line of sight from what you're doing to what the organization is doing, and you understand how that is contributing to the success of the organization. And connection, you feel like you belong here. You like the people around you. You enjoy the culture. You feel like you fit within that culture. That sense of belonging to an organization is one of the major things that lead people to be engaged in their work. So again, harder to see here because of the background graphics, but meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. Again, the acronym to remember there is MAGIC. Those are things that will lead people to be engaged beyond just satisfaction. So it's important now for us to kind of take another step back and say, how has this been approached? So we want to create engagement in our organization, and that's something that we're doing. How has this been traditionally approached? And the answer is, if you go to many leaders in organizations and you say, what are you doing to increase engagement in the organization? Most of them will say, well, we do a survey, and therefore we're working on engagement. So survey equals engagement. More enlightened organizations are going to say, well, we do a survey, and guess what? We're really great because we also do an action plan, and the survey plus the action plan is going to lead to engagement. So survey plus action plan is what more and more organizations are doing. They're realizing we can't get this feedback from our employees without taking some action on the feedback. And at some level, I would say that will always be true. Whenever you collect feedback from your employees, you should always have a plan to take some action on that feedback, or else the feedback really is useless and you lose the trust of your employees. We call it the measure react approach. And very often we get into this cycle of measuring levels of engagement in our organization. So we survey to determine the level of engagement. We learn the general areas of employee concern. We take action to address those concerns, and we survey again to see if the concerns are reduced, to see if we have any sort of growth that's happened in the organization. That's the measure react approach, and it's the approach that most organizations take. We would put organizations on a continuum, what we call a maturity model. From different levels that organizations are at in terms of the level at which they can engage, or the most engagement that they can expect to receive. When we're working with clients at DecisionWise, what we say is we want to meet them where they are and help them get where they want to be. And so what we'll often do is we'll put our clients on this continuum between measurement, commitment, management, integration, and mastery. And what we find is that with the measure react approach, that we're able to get to a certain level with regard to engagement, which we call the commitment level. When we're just measuring and reacting, we're only at the commitment level. The management, what really gets us to the management level, is where we start driving engagement through the management structure. We're creating consistency and experience across the entire organization. There are strengths to this measure react approach, but really that it only once you're at the commitment level, there are strengths to the measure react approach. It can help you make marginal improvements in targeted areas. It can help bolster overall score from one year to the next. It creates awareness around engagement that likely didn't exist before, and it builds momentum in engagement efforts. So if you're able to get to the level of commitment where your leadership team is saying, this engagement thing, it's working, we're seeing some marginal improvement, and we think that it's really important in our organization, you're at a really important inflection point where you can now expect to transfer ownership. We can start to transfer ownership from just the core HR team or the committee that's working on it to now driving engagement through the leadership structure. Now, in order to make that leap, in order to transfer ownership from this group over here to the management team, we have to take it from a measure react approach into more of a proactive approach. If you're just starting out with engagement, where do you focus? Well, you probably, if you've never done a survey before, you should probably think about doing a survey. You do it 1 to 2 years, and you embrace the measure react approach for what it is. It's a way to build commitment in the organization toward engagement.
It's also a powerful symbol to the employees that the employee engagement, their experience matters. And so you're gonna react on a few things that are gonna make a difference, but you're also sending a really clear message that's gonna build that commitment that Dave's talking about.
Mm-hmm. If you've been doing your survey for a while and you feel like you're making limited progress now, you might consider a more proactive approach. So now we're talking about transferring ownership. Design your employee experience. You hold managers accountable to competencies that create engagement, and you integrate engagement principles into organizational systems. Let's talk more about that. The survey process itself creates awareness. When you have an action plan along with awareness, now you've done action. Now we're talking about holding people accountable to engagement on their teams, not to the engagement survey, but to engagement on their teams. So we're making a leap to accountability. We're holding managers accountable to the engagement of the people on their team. If you're just starting out with engagement, let me warn you, this might be going too far to do this the first time you ever do a survey. Just to say everybody's gonna be accountable, not to their action plans, but to the engagement of the people on their team. How do you make the leap to accountability? We have to create a standard for engaging leadership.
Dave, really fast, let's just go into that a little bit more. So we have a lot of people on the call. Maybe some of them have done surveys. How would they know that makes sense, right? Where that they want to move from the react to more this level of accountability. Talk through that a little bit more so they could maybe profile what an organization might look like and when they might be ready for that.
So I think the main sign is when you start seeing leaders involve themselves kind of their own volition. If you have a leadership team that's actively trying to create engagement, then it's probably time to say, and that could be before you've ever surveyed. You might not have ever surveyed before, but if you have a leadership team that is actually trying to create engagement in the organization, I think that's a sign that you have the commitment level from the organization to say we're gonna have an engaged workforce. Part of the way that we're going to please our clients, part of the way that we're going to accomplish organizational goals is through having an engaged workforce. When you get to that level, that's when you start saying, okay, we need to start holding people accountable to this, because now it's an expectation of the organization.
And Christian, you've worked with a lot of organizations who are at all levels of this. What have you found when they make, we're going to talk about making that leap. What are some of those triggers that they see, and how have you been able to help them move? Because I know a lot of people on the call are like, okay, I think we're ready for something more. We want a fresh approach. Right. We need to take this to different levels. But I think there's often a disconnect of what am I ready for that? Right.
And I think Dave hit on a lot of the key signs. It's really the thing that's most obvious to me is when an organization is ready to do more is the buy-in from the CEO. If I see the C-suite and especially the CEO really starting to take an interest in this. In fact, Dave and I have a wonderful client that we've both worked with over the years. Initial year working with the CEO, working with the organization, it was more an attitude of, well, what's this all about? What's the survey data? But I think we've worked with them 4 years now, and we've seen, I think Dave knows who I'm talking about, but we've seen that CEO take each year an increased interest in this, and by doing that, they're pushing the results down with greater accountability, with greater transparency to the rest of the organization. They're expecting more interesting things from their managers in actually reacting to the survey results, and they're actually it's become really a partnership with us to help improve engagement. That buy-in from the top is key. What the reason we're even talking about it like this is we see too many organizations come to us and say, hey, we want level 5 results, and we look at them and, well, you're at a level 1 readiness, right? So it's helpful to have some of these indicators, and one of those key indicators is C-suite buy-in.
And one of the things that we're going to be doing at DecisionWise over the next several months is helping organizations, especially the HR teams, help their C-suite identify and become more engaged in this process, understand what they need to be doing. Because without that buy-in, without that top-down, hey, we're ready to go, everything we're talking about right now, and we'll talk about it in more depth, really is going to fall on deaf ears, because we need to have that buy-in from the top.
If the buy-in isn't there, and we're talking, we know, because we introduced this up at the top, we're going to be talking about competencies that can be adopted by an organization that will lead to engagement. If your leaders aren't bought in to creating engagement, then that's the group that has to hold people accountable. That's the group that has to be in place. If they're not bought in, then there's not much you can do there.
As well as role model the behaviors, live the competencies. We're going to be talking about themselves. So it really is, it is a journey. Dave and I geek out over this stuff because we know amazing things can happen when you take a reactive approach and then you start adding these proactive initiatives that we'll kind of speak to today. Some big things are possible, but they're only possible when the organization's ready for that, when they've got the right level of buy-in and commitment to it.
That's great. And I wanted to pause here because I do think it's important that not everybody's ready to make this leap. And we want to help you get to that point, but there are key steps that we need to take before you can get there. You may already be there looking for this, and you may not be. And so it's important that we understand that not everyone's going to be right here, but if you are, we're ready to help you go to that next level.
Another telltale sign is you've been doing the survey for a few years, you saw improvement for a couple of years, and now you're kind of stuck. It doesn't feel like you can improve anything, and it becomes like squeezing the balloon again, right? Yeah. So that's another telltale sign that maybe you're ready for a little bit more as well. So making the leap to accountability, what we're talking about is creating a standard for engaging leadership in the organization. So we've introduced a model to you today, the MAGIC model, which we know creates engagement in an organization. So that's going to be the basis for a standard for engaging leadership in the organization, that our leaders are not only aware of meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection as important ingredients to an engaging workplace, but they are also aware of how to create those things. So that's one thing that we need to do. We have to create that standard. We have to communicate an expectation to leaders. And this is where it gets the conversations become a little more difficult, because now you're going from, we're not just expecting you to manage business results, we're expecting you to manage people and the engagement of your people. And that becomes, because it's a key indicator of what the business results are going to be, but at the same time, we're putting focus on the people on our teams. So we're supporting the leaders in their development of these competencies, and we're measuring the competencies regularly to make sure that we're making progress on them. So that's making the leap to accountability. Want to take another step back here just to kind of talk about, because all of this fits into, the proactive approach really fits into the idea of designing your employee experience. And part of these competencies is they're part of the design of your employee experience. Having a standard for leadership of how they should lead is part of your employee experience. So talking about that, what we look at with regard to employees' experience, really important part of the experience of employees are going to be these moments that happen during their lives, or during their employee life cycle, that we call moments of truth. And there are two different kinds of moments of truth. One is called a chronos moment. And this is really moments of truth that happen at predetermined times, they're at predictable intervals. You know when they're going to happen. So sometime between your hire date and your exit date, you're going to have onboarding. You're going to be trained. You're going to have raises and bonuses and conversations around that. You're going to have performance reviews, promotions. There are a lot of things that are really critical moments for your employees that happen at predictable intervals.
Yeah, and Chronos, we should mention, we're going to talk about two kind of measures of time, and this comes from Greek. Chronos referring to more the chronological thing. So if we think through the employee life cycle, these things that we can schedule, we know these things are going to happen. They follow a timeline. The next slide, we're going to move in from the Chronos into Kairos, which is another measure of time, but it's less sequential or less predictable. It's more around the right moment or the opportune time. And these are things that happen in the workplace that we can't predict. We can't set our clock by it or schedule. We know when someone's going to start with our organization. We have a rough idea of when we do promotions, things like that. There are other things in the employee experience that are less predictable, such as workplace conflict, failures, heavy workload, reductions in force, customer complaints. All those, the complexity of the daily life. These are important moments to handle for the stakeholders, but especially for the employees. And our managers are creating experiences with every interaction, either Chronos or Kairos. They're shaping that employee experience.
The nice thing about a Chronos moment, or that moment of truth that can be planned for, is that it can be planned for. And you would be surprised at how many organizations don't really put much planning into the experience in those moments that you can predict and that you can plan for. So having people, planning for and using our magic principles in those areas, how do you, in onboarding, for example, make sure people they have meaning in their work, that they're growing in terms of their meaning, that they feel like they feel trusted, that they have autonomy, that they feel like they're growing or making progress. In that onboarding experience, are we bringing all of those elements into the onboarding experience, or into the annual review process, or any of these things that are predictable? You'd be surprised where you can design something, and it is something, how little we think about engagement in those things and just getting done the thing that we want to get done in those situations. So there's an opportunity in Chronos moments to really use the magic model and be proactive. Again, talking about the proactive approach, be proactive, design those moments around creating engaging experiences. With the Kairos moments, we can't plan them. Christian mentioned that the rough translation of this is the right moment. So with the Kairos moments, what we have to do is we have to prepare our leaders for the right moment. So when that workplace conflict happens, when the failures happen, your managers are equipped with a model and with competencies that can help them deal with those moments in the most appropriate way that will lead to engagement. So when we say we're creating an employee experience, it's hard to plan for those things that happen at unpredictable intervals. But what you can plan for is you can have managers with the skills and the guiding principles of how to treat those moments. So introducing the engaging leader competencies here. What we believe is that the ability to engage employees or engage direct reports is a set of skills and behaviors that can be learned by leaders. We believe that improving these competencies can help leaders navigate moments of truth, both the Chronos and the Kairos moments that we've talked about already. And these skills and behaviors are geared toward improving employee perceptions around meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. So they're built within a model that we know leads to engagement. So if one of our purposes is to create engagement, we're building it within a model that leads to engagement.
Right. And this is where we're starting to talk through what is a mind shift from the traditional approach to employee engagement, where it's not just the measure and react. Yes, that part is still important. Yes, we need to be doing it. It does help drive engagement, and especially helps give organization level things that we can do to improve engagement. But this proactive approach of just the realization that, hey, managers create the ecosystem on their team for engagement. And by giving them the right tools and skill sets, we can help build engagement on their team and ultimately for the entire organization.
So looking at it, we're trying to create meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. And we can do that through specific competencies. We'll talk about each one of these individually, just to kind of give a deeper dive into each of these elements. But the idea is managers that are, not only do they understand what meaning is, they understand what are the behaviors and skills that I need to learn in order to create meaning. So
Dave, just a little explanation around these. So each one of the magic concepts has competencies built around that, right? So what we're going to be discussing is each one of the competencies related to meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Justin. And competencies, they were designed to be things in the control of the manager. These are things that, we're not asking managers to be accountable for things that are something the CEO should be doing or HR should be in charge of. These are things that any manager has control of within their team setting, and that's where we're
that's a really important point to make, Christian, because there are many ways to be proactive about engagement, and we're showing one. Right. So there are many. Well, we showed another one, designing your Chronos moments, right? Designing those. That's another way to be deliberate about engagement, or be more proactive about engagement. There are structural elements in place that managers really don't have any say in. There's parts of the organization, their incentive package, all these other things that might impact engagement that are out there. So we're talking about the things that are in the control of the manager here.
Exactly.
One way to improve engagement in the proactive category. So, and by the way, we've all seen competency models before, and a lot of organizations have a leadership competency model. Why is this different? If we put all of these things together, we might just call this engagement as a competency. All these things together are one competency, which is engaging other people. And so the title of this workshop, I think, was called engagement is a competency. That's really a misnomer. What we're saying is that the ability to engage somebody is a combination of skills and behaviors that will lead to engagement. So we're looking at this, we're breaking this down by different by these different magic factors. The first one is meaning. So for an organization to create meaning, or for a manager to create meaning on their team, these are some of the things that from our research have indicated will lead somebody to be engaged. One of them is called value alignment. Is what's important to me personally important to the organization that I work for. So there's specific behaviors that a manager can have in order to drive value alignment, help people see where what's important to them aligns with what they're doing in the organization.
Right, and that's a great example, and I know we probably can't do commentary on all of these, but this one, just as we get our feet wet with these competencies with this group, value alignment is great. We can't force someone to find meaning in their work. People have to meet us part way. But a manager can control how they help an employee connect the dots. This is what's important to Dave in his personal values. Here's where they align to what the organization's doing, and he can connect those dots and again make this invitation to engage more compelling. Ultimately the employee still gets to choose whether or not they find that meaning, but we can do more to help them see the opportunity for it.
We have some others, meaning because it's so much about the purpose behind my work. Having a strategic perspective as a manager is such a critical thing for helping people on their team see meaning, so that they don't get bogged down in the day-to-day myopia of their work. Inspiring others, that skill set to be able to inspire them and see the purpose behind their work. By the way, all of these competencies have definitions behind them and kind of things that feed into them, but these are just kind of the general competencies that we're presenting here today.
Yeah, and hopefully the folks on the phone are getting a feel for, one, how this is different than maybe what they've seen as an approach to engagement, and then also, two, just this idea that if we can identify competencies that lead to engagement, well, competencies, as we all know, are things that can be measured, they can be taught, they can be developed. So you can start to see how this can become a powerful tool in driving engagement.
We're being deliberate about creating engagement here.
Right.
It's not just all the other competencies that, of course, leaders need. It's being deliberate about creating engagement.
And as someone with in the human capital field, I like that we also are taking the focus off HR. Hey, HR owns engagement by themselves. No, we collectively own it, and this is how we're tying it to the manager.
Right. The next one is autonomy, and again, as Christian mentioned, we can't go through each of these specifically, but under autonomy, we have delegation, empowerment, accountability. And accountability is in there as kind of a counterweight to autonomy. Oftentimes we want to trust our employees, but there has to be some accountability on our teams in order for autonomy really to shine. So these are skills, and there are different behaviors that feed into these skills in order to help create autonomy. Growth, strengthening performance, investing in growth, managing ambition. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because I think growth is one of those things that an employee will look. Employees have a lot of ambition, especially the new workforce that's entering. Many of you have experience with people that are younger, and it's been true for all young populations through time. But with millennials in particular, growth is becoming more and more an important part of their proposition that they're looking for from their employees or from their employers when they go to work. It's something sometimes Christian and I call it growth is currency. Right. To a lot of people. They'll forego more money in order for them to have a growth opportunity that can be beneficial to them in their career. Well, that's part of that is a manager's ability to manage their ambition, to kind of rein them in and say what are that ability to say, look, let's think about your current performance, strengthen current performance, and then let's talk about what are the things that you want to do in the future.
Well, one of the things Dave and I have both seen with our clients is that a lot of times growth is a low perception for the organization. If we dive in deeper, we can trace it down to the fact that managers, especially frontline managers, don't really know how to talk about growth unless they have a promotion to dangle in front of them. And so unless there's a job to talk about, they don't talk about growth. And that's a huge missed opportunity. There's things to better understand their personal growth agenda, as well as help them understand how the organization needs them to grow. Even if it's not a formal promotion or something like that, just helping them develop that language and that ability can do wonders for the overall engagement proposition.
And it's an interesting thing, as you mentioned. I think managers shy away from that conversation a lot. And maybe it's because they don't have the appropriate tools or they really know how to get that conversation started. But all of that fits into this competency of investing in growth, being able to have those regular conversations about growth. What we've found is that just having the conversation can radically impact somebody's ability to engage. Like somebody they will engage because they feel like their manager cares about growth, even if in reality they're not necessarily progressing. As a result of an engagement survey, I don't think I've ever given the advice to an organization to go in and add extra layers to your organization in order to provide more growth opportunities. I've never done that. But I think a really easy way to kind of, and a free way, is to gear your managers toward growth. Think about it. It's an important part. Whether or not you're thinking about it, your employees are. They're thinking about these things. These are very, very critical, important things that they're working toward.
You know, we've got a few questions that have been popping in here, and I think we'll have some time near the end to respond to them. But one that just is on this current topic is, I almost called it for someone named Mark, but it actually just says Mark is answered. That's not their name. Yeah, I'm a professional, folks. But the question is growth within a company always about money? No. Compensation is always about money.
Right.
But that I think he's right directly into the power of what we have with our managers. Our managers can help people understand that. One, they can understand what growth means to the individual. Maybe for one person, you know, their only definition of growth is advancement and compensation, and maybe that's where they'll kind of keep that mindset. But a manager can do a lot to say, look how we're growing here, look how I've grown here, and share stories and kind of paint a bigger picture about what growth is, and talk about the difference between growth and advancement. And as Dave said, especially with our millennials looking at growth, you know, help an organization adopt this mindset of we pay in growth. It's one of the things we actually offer to our employees.
One of the things that, and we're spending a little more time on growth because it's such a common question that we're asked about, and such a common competency that we're trying to develop in organizations. Is growth always about money? Well, sometimes it is, and that's the truth. And you want to identify that as a manager, and that's part of this, right? Is it just because this person wants to make more money that they're looking for growth? And if that's the case, that's a different issue completely. I want to kind of obviously as you grow in a company, you if you get promoted, you expect to be paid more money. So it often accompanies that. But these position changes are not really how we're defining growth in the way that creates engagement. It's the day-to-day stretching, the day-to-day feeling like I'm getting better, the day-to-day feeling like I'm equipping myself for the future. That's really what leads to engagement. You might see somebody be a little more motivated leading up to a promotion, but as soon as that promotion is gone, then that's no longer motivating. So we want to get away from the idea that this is just always about money. As Christian said, money is about money. If people want more money, there are ways to get them more money without promoting them necessarily. Great
area. Dave and I could talk about growth all day.
We could.
Our clients.
We're moving on. Yeah, we could talk about it all day. Impact. Just to kind of give you an idea of what's here. Valuing contribution. The idea that one of the lowest scores on many surveys is the idea that my manager recognizes me. Just the idea that managers value that contribution. I think most managers do value the contribution of their team members. How do you show that? How do you give appropriate recognition? How do you tailor that to the audience? Those are the competencies that we're looking for to make sure that their value of contribution is translating into people feeling valued and feeling like their contribution is important. Focusing on the customer is an important piece of impact. Being able to say, look, this is what is the good that you're doing in the world? And usually the good that you're doing in the world as an organization is going to be for your customers. Focusing on the customer can really help people feel like the impact of their work. We work with, by the way, Christian, an organization that no matter what, they always have a customer conversation in whatever meeting it is, right. Even if it's two HR people meeting together to talk about compensation or whatever it might be, they'll have a conversation about, okay, how does this ultimately impact the customer? Right. Because that's such a focus for them. And their impact scores as an organization are through the roof. Exactly. Because they're deliberate about focusing on the customer. And what we're talking about is even in accounting jobs, even in non-customer facing roles, we're understanding how does our work ultimately impact the customer. We're having our managers have those conversations. Personalizing impact is what I talked about before. making sure that whatever recognition you're giving is the right recognition for that person. All skills with regard to impact.
Right. Right. It's so interesting. This impact thing, I mean, recognition falls in there, this customer focus, personalizing the impact. It goes back to that Maya Angelou quote that I'll probably butcher a bit here, but people might forget the things you say, but they won't forget the way they make you feel. Here and in all these areas, our managers are creating an experience, and they can validate that the work their employees are doing are making an impact. And that directly drives engagement in the workplace. These aren't expensive things to teach a manager, or to even just stress to recognize and to teach a few basic skills on how to do that effectively.
Right. Last one, connection, and obviously we focus a lot on the relationships between manager and employees. Those relationships are critical. Teamwork and collaboration, being able to collaborate across functions, which is a struggle with many organizations, teaching managers the skills in order to do that, cultivating the larger culture in the organization on their team, whatever that culture might be, making that consistent across, for my team is consistent to the team across from me, etc. With this model, we've made a few assumptions. Christian talked about this already. First of all, there are many ways to be proactive about engagement. Now we're talking about a manager's sphere of control. How do we drive engagement through the leadership structure? How do we hold managers accountable to engagement beyond just the survey itself? The survey doesn't talk about specific behaviors or skills. How do we do that in a way that will be very specific in terms of these are the behaviors that we're expecting in order to engage people? So we're talking about the manager's sphere of control. The other thing that we're talking about is that this is a focus on immediate team. Of course, a manager has impact on other parts of the organization, but what we're talking about with these competencies is their ability to impact their immediate team's engagement. And that happens in a larger context, and there are many factors, as we mentioned before, that can lead to engagement or away from engagement in an organization. And now we're being deliberate about saying these are the factors that a manager can control. So we're not just saying if engagement is low on your team, we're not just directly blaming the manager for that. We're looking at the manager and saying, okay, what behaviors are you lacking in, or what skills and competencies do you need to develop in order to improve engagement, or is it just a function of the larger organization? So we've talked a lot about this, the evolution of engagement ownership, and that's really what this is about, is trying to evolve ownership of engagement in the organization. I'm guessing that most of the people on this phone call right now are from HR departments from different organizations. And you're on this call right now because you feel the onus, or you feel the burden of creating engagement in your organization. You're doing a survey, you want to make change, you want to make improvement in the organization, and you'll probably, in order to measure engagement, always do that survey. That's always going to be an important part of your engagement effort, and HR will always be involved. But the more we can evolve ownership in the organization of engagement, we want to transfer from HR to getting our executives involved and bought in. As we talked about at the very top, that's a good sign that you're ready to do a little more proactive work with regard to engagement. That your executives are involved and bought in and are starting to own engagement themselves. Then it transfers from executives, once they have the buy-in and start holding people accountable. Now it's owned by the leadership team, and now we're driving engagement through the leadership team using competencies and holding people accountable to competencies that we know create engagement. And then we want ultimately that everybody in the organization owns engagement. Christian talked about this at the very beginning. There's only so much you can do to create an environment where you expect people to engage, and we're creating a proposition, I think is the word that you use there, Christian, that says this proposition to our employees. This is an invitation to our employees. Please engage with us. But at the end of the day, they decide whether or not they're going to engage. They decide whether or not they're going to be part of that proposition, part of that, and accept your invitation. So in reality, engagement is still a 50-50 proposition, even though you put all these things in place and design the employee experience. We still need our employees to participate in that process.
And I love that we're getting a few notes. Anytime we make a generalization about an audience, we'll get a few notes. So not everyone is in HR, and we love everyone. We love everyone from every department. And it's actually very encouraging that we have folks outside of HR on this call, because as you know, to Dave's point, we're the ideal setting for driving engagement is an increased sense of ownership from different areas, departments, and ultimately the entire population for an organization.
And Christian, to that point, some of these comments that are coming in, I love, because it's shifting away from HR, right? That we all have a responsibility as managers, as directors. One of the words there is grassroots. I love that, because that's really the premise of this, that it's got to shift away from being an HR-centric proposition, and it's got to be organizational. So I love that. So one of the questions that came in was talking about what are some of the resources and tools that are there. While we weren't going to go into this in too much depth, I think I'm going to give you a little bit of a precursor of what DecisionWise is going to launch out in the next couple of weeks. And so maybe one of you want to talk about the Engaging Leader Multi-Rater Assessment, and just talk about that, what the premise of this will be, why is this important, and how will this tool help managers, HR folks, anyone who's on this call, how will it help them understand how these competencies, where they can be strengthened and where they're doing really well?
Yeah, and the Engaging Leader Multi-Rater is an assessment. It's a multi-rater feedback assessment, like a 360 feedback survey, if you're familiar with those. It's using that same model to measure around these engaging leader competencies, the competencies we just walked through. And by the way, we have additional competencies for executives because there's sphere of control at the top of the organization is expanded. But we've created a multi-rater assessment to measure these competencies so that people can have a sense for not only how they see themselves as they think through these particular areas. We ask questions from a few different directions on these, but they can also see how their direct reports and their supervisor rate them. We usually wouldn't include a full 360, but we want to get those key groups in there so that they have some sense of how they're shaping that team environment, and then that information can be used for their development. Now, there's a few ways that we see that being used. One, we coach people directly on the results of their multi-rater, and two, we love it. We foresee this as part of a manager development program. We see it also as a potential approach for what we call a raise the floor approach. Occasionally you'll run a survey for an organization, and overall pretty good, but there might be a couple areas that need some additional focus. So this is one way to go in and spend some time with some teams that need a little bit of additional focus on what they can do to drive engagement. And it's you can see how we're leveraging or interacting with managers in a way that's different than just saying, hey, here's your lowest 2 items on the survey, get to work. We're addressing engagement. This proactive approach is an attempt to address engagement at its headwaters and the experience the manager's creating on their team.
Great. So maybe talk just to make sure everyone's clear. So we have multi-rater assessments. You alluded to a 360-degree feedback survey, right? So where that has leadership competencies on there. This is a multi-rater that focuses specifically on those competencies that we just showed. And for business leaders, that's what they would see. But the executive leaders would then have an additional competency for each one of the magic elements, right? Because their sphere of control changes, as you alluded to.
Right.
So if an organization wanted to understand this and use this tool, what would they hope to gain? Rater. Thank you. Somebody's correcting my speech. Multi-rater means that we have multiple. I love this group. This group is awesome.
That was Justin's accent.
That was
not a spelling.
That was my accent. Multi-rater. So because the survey, they will be assessed by themselves. They will take the assessment themselves, and then their direct reports. Will anyone else take that assessment as well?
Supervisor, manager.
Okay,
Manager
great.
Assessment as well.
So they'll have the supervisor, they take it themselves, and then the direct reports will take that as well.
And it's an awareness tool to say, well, here's how I think I'm doing around, let's say, delegation. And Dave mentioned there's more detail underneath delegation. Mm-hmm. Now I'm really worried about my pronunciation. We've got some feedback in those comments. I would take those survey items, thinking about myself, my performance, my behaviors, and then when I got my assessment back, my report back, I'd go through and actually compare, well, here's how my direct report saw me in these areas. Here's how my supervisor sees this. And then the question is, am I okay that that's the experience I'm creating for these people, or do I need to invest a little bit of effort in enhancing that part of my approach?
Great. And so for the folks that are on, we're introducing this right now as, hey, it's coming the first week of June is when DecisionWise will be launching this out. So please watch some of the comments where we have these notes and tools and resources. All of that will be coming out from DecisionWise in the next couple of weeks. For those of you who are on this webinar, you'll get a little bit more information as well because you attended. We'll make sure that you have some additional resources as well. But the Engaging Leader multi-rater assessments will be coming out in the next week. Along with the material that will be there, so that you can understand those leadership competencies, what's involved with them, the definitions, and then context around that, how we can take these concepts and really create change within your organization. So we have a couple of minutes, guys. Anything else that you want to add before we jump into maybe some of those other questions that we couldn't address right at that time?
No, just hit on the idea that this engagement, especially with this 50-50 slide here, what we're really talking about working on is those of you and focusing on the organizational side of this is how can we create the most compelling invitation for our employees to engage? And part of that is, interestingly, those in HR, those in leadership roles, you're playing kind of a dual role because you're on both sides of this triangle. You're creating that experience, but you're also trying to find your own meaning, autonomy, growth, and impact in your own experience. And the way you engage in the work also impacts that overall engagement.
I'm about to make another broad generalization and probably get blasted on this.
Watch out.
Actually,
this is a tough group.
I think
this is Dave speaking.
Many of you. This is Dave.
Get your emails ready.
Right. Send an email to me. So many of you who have done engagement surveys, for example, have probably worked on communication in the past, and communication obviously is a critically important part of the employee experience. But it's also something that we have not found in a key driver analysis of engagement before. Now, it can help certainly. All the magic factors, meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection, are all focused on that. Many times you'll get that, and you'll get it back the next year, and communication is still the lowest scoring item. And so you're like, okay, well, what can we do now? We can do more things and more things and more things. And that issue is one that we work on with a lot of organizations when we're using the measure react approach to engagement. And at some point you get to it and you say, okay, we've improved communication to a point. We'll never get all the way there. And what we're saying is when you kind of get to that point where you max out on a thing, with engagement, with communication, you'll never have 100% of people agreeing that they're well communicated to. What we're talking about is saying, okay, forget about all these things that we've been reacting to on the survey, and we're really trying to be proactive. Let's focus specifically on those things that we know create engagement. And you have to be at the right place as an organization to do that, but that's what this is about.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'm going to jump into some of the questions really fast. If you have others, please feel free to bring them in. One of the questions was about the book Magic. So first off, thank you for knowing about the book Magic, the 5 Keys to Unlocking the Power of Employee Engagement. It does not go in depth into the core engagement as a core competency and these competencies as we've described them. It takes the ideas of the 5 keys of where they are. What we're providing now will be more in-depth information specifically for that, and you will see those tools and resources coming out within the next couple of weeks. Again, you're getting a little precursor to that, but in the next couple of weeks, you'll see all of that coming out. So
I would add that the book gives the framework and the background for all of these competencies,
Right.
and so it does talk about some of the concepts that we use in the competencies, but not specifically calling them out as specific competencies.
It gives a really great background on where we got the framework, why it's valid, what it means for people, the 5 elements there. It doesn't go into the details as far as we are with these competencies, but it sets the stage up very nicely for them.
Christian, you want to take that next question that's right there? So this question is about, larger organizations, how do we make these transfers? It looks like they're doing surveys at a divisional level rather than at the full level. And how do they, how can they help their leaders who might be surprised by results that they see?
Yeah, and this is really where that maturity model comes in to play. For some organizations, it takes a few years of running surveys and internal efforts. I'll go back to that word, grassroots. It takes a few years of building to get more buy-in. And so with that approach, yes, especially within large organizations, if we only have leadership buy-in at a department or a division, and we want a more complete approach, then that's the goal every year. We're going to run a survey, and we're going to focus on not only what are the reactive things we need to do based on the survey, but we're going to also focus on what can we do to push buy-in up and down the command chain here. And for some organizations, it takes years, and for some organizations, they never get there, frankly. But some really impressive things can be done just by the way we run a survey and strategically try to involve more leaders each time we do it.
It's obviously helpful if you're in the context of a larger organization or a sub-department within, which we work with many of those. It's helpful if everybody in the larger organization is adopting the same model as you, but they don't have to, in order for you to set that expectation for your department or your subgroup.
And it's really great. Part of getting buy-in the next year is showing the success from the last year. Dave and I ran a pilot with Dave ran it. I'm just taking credit for it. Dave ran a pilot with a large manufacturing client. They weren't sure how far they wanted to go with this engagement stuff, so they ran a survey for just one of their departments. The success was so phenomenal, and they had some internal ambassadors in HR that did a really great job helping leaders see those results. That the next year they did a global rollout. international
Huge,
survey, big survey, and they're coming back the third time, I think, now. And so it can be done, and I think that realization that we're picking up from this comment that not everyone's bought in is really key to have. I just saying, okay, a real awareness of where you are in the current year and where you want to go next year is, I think, your best position to get things moving.
Great. Well, Dave and Christian, thanks so much for taking time to do this. Thank you all for being on the call with us today. Again, watch our newsletters, watch for communication from DecisionWise. You'll see in the next couple of days, you'll see more and more coming out about this. We're excited to give a different approach, give you different tools to really, we've put a lot of focus on the 50-50. We put a lot of focus on the employer. This helps us shift and have tools and resources to help managers and individuals really both learn and choose to be engaged. So thanks again, all.
Have a great day.